Your message to Jews is?
Who cares about you?
They are the evil of the world.
Queer people should not be Zionists.
Hamas. These people get it.
I'm here undercover at the Nakba Day protest, which commemorates the Arabs losing the 1948 war against Jews that they started. Let's see what people have to say.
What would you say is important between the queer community and standing in solidarity with the Palestinians?
Queer people's standards of justice should not align with Zionism.
You do know that queers in Palestine are openly murdered, right?
That may be true, but that does not mean an entire civilization should be toppled.
And does that mean that you're anti-Zionist?
100% I am full-heartedly anti-Zionism and anti-Judaism.
Free the world from Israel.
Gaza genocide is just a dress rehearsal for what's going to happen to all of us.
I saw your sweatshirt. Do you mind explaining?
So the person behind me is the leader of the resistance of Palestine. He died recently fighting against the terrorist state of Israel. But he's a martyr, so is everyone who is fighting against Israel.
Do you know what your headband means?
It's the resistant group of Palestine. It started because of the Israeli invasions.
Come out and support Hamas. These people get it.
They're asking for a genocide of Israelis and Jews. Right in the middle of the march, the words are Antifada Revolution. You would think that a flag that is behind me would be being waved somewhere else that is a terrorist state, but no, it is currently in New York on a commemoration of the Antifada. You really do stand with the Antifada?
Oh yeah, absolutely,
For sure, yeah. I support the resistance. It's not going to stop at Palestine. You see it coming to the United States right now. We're paying $5 in gas, all because of Israel.
It's all connected. I don't have money. I'm struggling.
A lot of people don't have any money.
I have nothing.
We should be doing everything in our power to not stand in solidarity with Israel or with capitalism.
Your message to Jews is?
Who cares about you? We don't care about you.
They are the evil of the world.
Jewish people around me, they just completely shut off their critical thinking.
As people wave their terrorist flags and chant for murdering of Jews, it's clear that the only things fueling these protests are misinformation and blind anti-Semitism. These people do not want peace. They want the destruction of the only Jewish state in the world.
What you just watched is a typical social media clip, the kind of clip that is influencing minds all over the world about Israel. After almost 3 years of constant war and untold destruction, the world really dislikes Israel to a degree and with a level of vitriol that is unprecedented historically. And it is socially the norm, never mind acceptable, to hold what were once considered to be extreme views about this country. Israel is about to crash into pariah status globally, for real. I returned to Israel 2 days ago, following 2 weeks in London, Strasbourg, and Berlin. It was just a timeout. I needed a break from everything. More on that in a coming written dispatch. On the flight to Tel Aviv from Berlin, I read a new piece by Andrew Fox about a disturbing Pew Poll that was published very recently, and it canvassed attitudes globally about Israel. This is a Pew Poll, the highly regarded American research organization that has been conducting nonpartisan research on a wide range of important policy and social issues since it was established in 2004. It cannot be disregarded. And the results? A 5-alarm wake-up call, if anyone is still snoozing out there. Israel has coasted for decades and not cultivated a sophisticated national and diplomatic communications system. There are fits and starts where there's this kind of panic mode that sets in, and attention focuses sort of short-term on Hezbollah, which has almost become a dirty word. Hezbollah means to explain, to offer an explanation. And Hezbollah has really become a parody of itself, where social media warriors generate sound bites that, for the most part, really just confirm their views to those who are in the same silo. They don't change minds. They don't reach new people. The problem isn't just Hezbollah or the lack thereof. It's much bigger. It relates to policy, to the people articulating policy in Israel. And the continued arrogance that led us to October 7th in Israel remains the defining trait among leadership of this country. Nothing really has changed. It's not a problem. It's a crisis. And this is what Mr. Fox and I get into today. We've included in the show notes the link to the Pew site, which features a summary of the poll regarding global views of Israel and its Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu. The poll was conducted over several months, and it was undertaken following the February 28th American and Israeli joint attack on Iran. The poll surveys opinion in 36 countries worldwide. The news is not good at all. Unfavorable views of Israel and Netanyahu have risen since 2025 even. Some countries, like Turkey, are a bit of a joke. I mean, in Turkey, for example, 93% of the population had a highly unfavorable view of Israel 1 year ago, and that has now gone up to 97%. That says a lot more about Turkey than Israel. But these results overall are a real wake-up call for those who still need one. Israel is moving along a continuum towards pariah status internationally. And there seems to be no strategy, never mind serious thought, being devoted to how to manage this situation. If there's a silver lining in all of this, it's that the disapproval rating of Netanyahu among Israelis, too, is pretty much in sync with the numbers we're seeing in many Western countries. And that disapproval rating extends as well to the current coalition government, which is quite loathed by a majority of Israelis. And I make those comments based on repeated domestic polls. I've included in the show notes a link to Andrew Fox's piece that led to this short podcast discussion. I spoke to Andrew yesterday, on Wednesday, June 10th. I urge you to read his summary and analysis and have a look at the Pew report as well. I'm Vivian Berkovich, former Canadian ambassador to Israel. Let's do this. Wednesday, June 10th, I've just returned from a little trip on the continent and the UK. And on my flight home yesterday, I was reading this fantastic article that you posted. Andrew Fox, thank you for joining State of Tel Aviv and Beyond today.
Absolute pleasure. Glad to see you made it back from the UK.
I actually flew back from Berlin, since we only have one airline servicing Israel at the moment, that being El Al. My choices are limited, and Berlin was the cheapest option. So there you go.
Crazy times.
But it was a great week, actually, in London, and I'm writing about it today, so you can see what I have to say about your
Look
home.
forward to it.
But I did read your piece on the plane home from Berlin. It was short, pithy, and gosh, I don't even know if I can come up with the right words. Astonishing, though, is the one that pops into my mind. Give us the top line summary of what the piece was about, and then we're going to dig in.
Well, it was really a couple of years worth of frustration. It's been like Cassandra in many ways, trying to call this, predicting the future, it coming true, and nobody having listened to you for 2 years. Because I've long made the case that actually the biggest strategic threat to Israel wasn't Hamas or Hezbollah or even the Iranian regime.
Right.
It was actually Israel's international legitimacy. And the reason it matters is because like no country can be an island. Every country in the world needs to trade, needs partners. And Israel is on a slope at the moment to genuine pariah status, I think, and it's a harsh thing to say, and it's not comfortable to hear. It's not comfortable to say, but you can see the road this is on. Now, we've had 2.5+ years of this storm of disinformation and lies about what's happening in Gaza, specifically in Gaza. I mean, we're seeing the lies creeping in Lebanon as well. The usual actors are throwing genocide in Lebanon around as well. Mm-hmm. But combine that with the legal efforts that are going through the UN, combine that with complicit governments around Europe particularly, but also Canada, we are seeing a gentle pathway, I think, towards real international isolation. And that is a huge danger. And we had a Pew poll come out just this week, basically saying that almost the entire world now more disapproves of Israel than approves. Okay, and on the surface, that's okay, fine, whatever. You know, Israel's got F-35s, it's got the Iron Dome. Why does that matter? Well, it matters because activist pressure becomes political pressure, which becomes political action. And that's the real danger, is that, you know, yes, you can push out all the medical tech in the world, you can push out all the startups, but if the momentum continues to build and grow, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but I'm saying there is a danger that Israel might be a lot more isolated than it is now, and that is, you know, that is potentially catastrophic for Israel as a state. So that's my argument. I've had this argument with people in the IDF about the information war and how the ground war is more important. But I think if you look really holistically at a really, you know, the widest strategic lens you can bring to this, I think this is a huge danger that's not being properly addressed at the moment.
I would totally agree. And so I don't want to get into the causes, but what you're saying is, here's the reality, here's the Pew Poll. And what the Pew Poll did, and of course I'm going to include your full piece in the notes to this brief discussion, but what the Pew Poll did was it looked at attitudes towards Israel globally. So it's not just America this time, or it's not just, you know, the EU, it's a global survey. So share with us the kind of high level summary of what the poll really showed with hard evidence.
Overall, it was looking at, you know, tens of thousands of people and their positions towards Israel. They broke it down to very unfavorable, somewhat unfavorable, somewhat favorable, and very favorable. And if we just look at some of the countries here, you know, the United States, for the first time ever, is 60% unfavorable versus 37% favorable. Let's pull out another random one. Germany, you know, traditionally a really good ally of Israel, 73% unfavorable, 23% favorable. UK, 69 versus 25. Australia, 79 versus 19. You know, this is a global shift against Israel. And funnily enough, it's only in countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and Ghana that reverse the trend, really interestingly. But, you know, they're three massive outliers. And almost every continent in the world, every country they've surveyed, comes up substantially unfavorable of Israel and very little favorable. And I think most importantly, if we look at the countries in there, the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council now have a majority unfavorable towards Israel. Right. That's a huge deal. And, you know, I talk about this slow pathway, like losing all 5 members of the Security Council. Look, let's hypothesize and say that a Democrat wins the next presidential election. There's going to be huge internal pressure on that one.
I mean, you're quite right. You know, what if a Democrat wins the presidency in the United States? On the other hand, I would say that, frankly, there's a similar risk if a Republican does. It depends on which Republican. Is it a Republican like J.D. Vance from the isolationist camp in America, or is it what I would call a more pragmatic Republican like Marco Rubio? So I don't think that Israel is safe in terms of support with the Republicans either. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I think that's the other concerning thing here, is that it's both political polls are seeing this turn against Israel.
Yeah.
You know, I think that is less pronounced on the European continent than it perhaps is in America. We don't have, I suppose, what they call the Groyper movement, you know, that kind of right-wing reactionary anti-Semitic kind of Candace Owens sort of right-wing. That's not so prevalent in Europe, I don't think. But look, you know, one of the things that's really kept Israel afloat in the UN is that veto in the UN Security Council. And
Correct.
If that veto goes out the window, that's a real problem, I suggest.
Yeah, it's a huge problem. I would agree. So, I mean, what we're not going to get into, but I just want to throw out for fun, is that this really massive shift against Israel also transliterates in each country into kind of, you know, accelerated or more intense anti-Semitism. And that's a phenomenon I'm going to leave for another day because it's a whole other conversation. But I do think it's important here to make the link between the two, because that is what we're seeing. You mentioned earlier, Andrew, that, you know, in your discussions with various members of the IDF, you've been hearing the view, well, you know, we've got F-35s, we're strong, that's what matters. So, I mean, I want to pause there for a moment for a few reasons, because we're seeing in this moment of almost total chaos in the region that in spite of the F-35s and in spite of the general kind of military and air superiority, Israel's got quite a mess on its hands. And we know that in June, when Prime Minister Netanyahu was feeling quite chuff after the joint attacks on Iran, he likened Israel to Sparta. He said Israel should aspire to be like ancient Sparta and be totally independent with respect to weapons production, weapons supply, you name it. So, I mean, so if we take it all and put it together, you're kind of saying Sparta may be imposed on Israel because of this massive shift in global public opinion, right?
Yeah, and Bibi talked about autarky, and look, I can see the argument actually. I mean, let's go back to early 2024 and look at the Rafah operation. That delay, that 4-month delay that was generated mainly by disinformation about civilian casualties, if we're honest. I've spoken to people I've been to Rafah myself. I've spoken to people who fought there, and they said it was basically a ghost town by the time they turned up. Hamas actually did a lot of the evacuation because they wanted to booby trap the entire city, and they did. And that's why Rafah is rubble, because Hamas had 4 months to prepare the ground before the IDF rolled in, and that came about through pressure from Washington. So that information campaign had a direct effect on the battlefield, which put Israel in a much more difficult position. And if you are completely independent, then you can just tell Washington to go swivel to a certain extent. Now, that is a problem, but Israel can produce a lot. Whether it can produce to the scale that it needs independently, I think is a really big ask. Creating an F-35 equivalent from scratch is not easy. I mean, just look at the problems that France and Germany are having at the moment. Look at the problems the UK is having with the GCAP. Just getting a fighter jet over the line is really hard. It's much easier to buy them from the States and develop them in the way that Israel does. That is a huge ask. And how much of Israel's national output can you afford to put towards defense before other sectors of the economy start struggling, because everything is being funneled into arms manufacture? So it's a lot more easily said than done, I think. And then on top of that, can you then make enough to guarantee that you're going to be able to defend yourself on your own? I mean, Turkey just today are starting to make noise about, how they feel threatened by what Israel's doing in Lebanon and that kind of thing. The Turkish are a very convincing military. They've got a lot of very high-end kit, and they've got a huge number of people that they can deploy. Is Israel going to go into a one-on-one against Turkey if it comes to that? These are the possibilities I think you have to work through. But I would caveat all of that by saying that, look, Israel has been at war forever. Since day one of Israel, it's been either high intensity or low intensity, but it's always been in conflict. Every generation of Israelis have had to sacrifice some of their children for national security. Every single generation. And Israel is also in a position where it is facing security threats that it cannot, at the moment, resolve on its own. Like, it cannot remove Hezbollah from Lebanon. It cannot overthrow Tehran and the Iranian regime on its own. If anyone even can. I mean, hell, the power of the United States couldn't do that. So never mind Israel on its own. So what you've got effectively is security dilemmas that you don't and cannot have the solution to independently. And you cannot end the war decisively. And so Israel's in this low-level conflict. Even if things stop today, right, there is still military conflict going to be going on. So, this is a really complex knot of a problem for Israel to work on. But my goodness, it's going to be so much harder to solve if the legitimacy issue gets worse than it already is.
Yeah, and I mean, I have to say that with reluctance, because I wish reality was different, I agree with you. I think that Israel is well on its way to pariah status, and it's difficult to see if and where the breaks are going to come, where the shift is going to come, because we have in Israel the same kind of, guiding, directing minds, management, government, the same people, mindset, thought processes, decision matrices that got us into the October 7th mess, in my view, in the last almost 3 years have compounded it. It's been the same people making decisions. And you ask the question, how did we get here? It's almost another October 7th moment. As I said, we still have the same directing minds, making decisions on the same basis, with the same vested interests politically. And this whole mess was clearly not thought through and planned through carefully, or we wouldn't be in this mess today.
I spoke to Yoav Gallant about this, and his take was that on October the 7th, Israel was so rocked that their strategy was essentially what he called a dirt road that over 2 years became a motorway. Now, that feels quite optimistic, if I'm honest, but it does prove the point that one of the reasons that Israel's in the mess it's in today is because at the start of the war on 7th of October, 8th of October, they were so on the back foot that they were making things up as they went along, and strategy was set. And then once you're on that road, it's very difficult to get off. But look, I think in terms of solution to this, and, I think the elections in Israel are going to be seismically important. I think the single best thing for Israel's international reputation would be to get rid of Bibi.
I'm going to stop you. I'm sorry. To make
please.
2 important points for our listeners. One is just to remind those of our listeners who may not be aware, Yoav Gallant, who you just mentioned, former Minister of Defense, who was fired by Bibi after a year and a half or so of the Gaza war, and with whom you've spoken many times. So that's an incredibly helpful source. The other thing is you just referred to elections. I've been saying for the last year and a half that I would not be at all surprised should Prime Minister Netanyahu create an opportunity to postpone elections. Legally, the election must be held by October 27 of this year at the latest. But if we're in the midst of yet another full-on war, I'm sure that there is some provision in legislation somewhere that he could trigger to postpone elections. And you know what? This now is something that we're hearing much more broadly in Israeli society. The pundit class is now saying, won't be surprised if that happens. So continue with the election. I agree with your point that we desperately need a change of government, not just for our external facing relations with the rest of the world, but frankly, in order to save this country, because, you talk about in your piece, this being a huge threat, the Pew Poll, the perception of Israel globally. The other huge threat that we're not going to talk about today is the domestic threat.
Yeah, and we can talk about law and order in the Negev or the West Bank another time.
That.
But look, I think the real solution, though, lies in being more proactive. I mean, there's a line in The Simpsons where Homer says, I've tried nothing and I'm all out of ideas. And I think that's kind of where we are right now, because you've got Jewish advocacy organizations who rake in millions of pounds, dollars, whatever it is. What have they done? What have they done for 2 years? Zetio UK has just been set up.
Yeah.
It's yet another anti-Semitic propaganda outlet. Like, where are the equivalents? Well, you can't just say, oh, we've got the Free Press or Visegrad 24. That's not good enough. It's not the profile needed. So, something like that. Like, pull every lever. Legal accountability in countries that allow it for media outlets that push deliberate disinformation. In the UK, we've got 2 regulatory bodies, one for broadcast, one for print. Like, start pushing legally. Find out where the money's coming from. Start getting forensic accountants onto these organizations. Start tracking them down and holding them legally accountable. There can be a really aggressive, offensive approach here, and it just hasn't been tried in nearly 2.5, 3 years.
I think that these legacy organizations are kind of built and continued to operate on a model that was relevant about 40 years ago. And, even at the outbreak, remember in the immediate aftermath of October 7th, they were still saying, Benjamin Netanyahu is the greatest thing for Israel, period. And it's taken quite some time for diaspora communities, not just Jews, for other people too, to understand that he may not be the greatest thing in the world, that he actually may be a liability and his leadership may be a liability for this country. So, yeah, I share your thought. Why aren't they pushing? Why aren't we seeing kind of concerted, forensic, really cutthroat work? And I think that in every country, the organizations that probably should be doing this work are scrambling to preserve their funding from their major donors. And as kind of, you just said that Yoav Gallant, the former Minister of Defense, was sort of really caught, all of Israel was kind of caught flat-footed, set back on their heels on October 7th. I think outside of Israel, it was even worse.
Yeah, I think that's fair comment. And look, I just look at the stuff they've been doing. They take people on speaking tours to the home crowd. They get people pushing out papers to the home crowd. They get, people online saying nice things about Israel and the home crowd retweets it. But like, breaking out of that silo is really challenging. I mean, and I've tried to do it and it's really hard. And even though I don't think I've succeeded, Because, once you say something nice about Israel, you're immediately tainted by being pro-Israel, shekels, and all the rest of it. So it's really hard to do. And it's because at the moment, I think we're such a minority of voices, and that's going to be probably the hardest thing to overcome. I think potentially more non-Israeli, non-Jewish voices would be a very good thing if you can find people of high enough profile. But on the same token, there is an entire industry set up to make that really unpleasant and uncomfortable.
Yes.
Like General Sir John McCall, former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, 4-star British general, retired, went to Israel, went into Gaza with the IDF, met Bibi, came back, wrote an article about what he'd seen and got absolutely hammered, brutally unpleasant experience. And that's deliberately designed to dissuade people from speaking up. And look, I've had to develop a thick skin over 2 years, but not everyone's got that in them. And why indeed should they?
Yeah. No, and I'll take this opportunity to say to you, thank you for the really extraordinary work you do. I mean, I've long been an admirer of not just the thick skin, but the fact that you say things, you articulate truths as you see them, not as we wish them to be. And we need voices like that across the board, not just from Israelis, not just from Jews, from people who aren't Jewish like you, but who come at it with a very clear perspective of let's get this done and let's do it right. And that includes the capacity for self-criticism.
I think so. And look, there is a utility to the squad of commentators out there who I call them slightly rudely the pom-pom squad, who just go out and go, yay, Israel. That's fine. And it's good for the home crowd and you need that morale. That's important. And that's okay. But it doesn't have any chance whatsoever of breaking outside of a very small silo. And that breakout is what's needed. And I think if there was going to be a messaging effort, it would be towards that breakout. And frankly, what you probably need is new voices who aren't stained, I suppose, include myself in that, for the last 2.5 years of having to be in the middle of the fight.
Right.
That does come with a degree of tarnish in some people's view. And new voices, non-Israeli voices, non-Jewish voices,
yes,
loud voices with a reach and a volume, and they're very hard to find. So there's no easy answer here, and if there was, someone would have taken it already. But identifying the problem, I think, is always the first step to finding a solution, and that article was my attempt to articulate the problem.
And thank you for doing it. You did it very well, and a tough topic to take on. And I encourage everyone listening here to take, whatever it is, the 5, 7, 8 minutes to read it, because you will learn a lot. Andrew Fox, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
As always, thanks for being here. Andrew referred in our discussion to a written article published about his visit to Israel by General Sir John McCall, which is also included in the show notes and definitely worth a read. If you do not already do so, please consider supporting the work of State of Tel Aviv and beyond with a premium subscription. You can do that at our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or make a contribution to buy me a coffee. Any amount is meaningful and deeply appreciated. We are independent, truly independent, and the support really means a lot. Until next time, stay safe. Things are heating up again in these parts, and I'll be sticking close to home. Have a safe weekend. We love hearing from you, so please comment on our website, stateoftelaviv.com, or send us a note to vivian@stateoftelaviv.com. That's VIVIAN @stateoftelaviv.com. And if you go to our website, stateoftelaviv.com, you can find the subscribe button and take it from there. Hope that you do that. On behalf of the State of Tel Aviv core team, Jan Zabo, our creative, graphic, visual, and marketing man, Amir White, producer and editor extraordinaire, sound guy, who is also impressively patient with me and my boomer tech deficiencies, and our social media manager who pitches in on everything. Thank you, Maya Naftalin. Thanks to the team, and thank you, listeners, for being here. Until next time, stay safe.